All right. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. And welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I do have an announcement to make. And that announcement is that I may have to postpone my show for next week, possibly. I have some family concerns that need to be taken care of with a loved one. And those of you who have ever had to go through that process and you start hearing terms like hospice and palliative care, you know that those are not fun terms to hear. So I may have to postpone my broadcast. So if you don't see me on Monday, know that my broadcasts have been postponed. Thank you. Good morning, Lady Judy. Good morning, Mr. Williams. Good morning, Pastor Ben. So I just want to give a heads up. If you don't see me on at 11 a.m., I haven't left the building, so to speak, but I have simply had to postpone my broadcast, and then I will come back and let you all know when I will return. All right, so I just want to put that out there. I do solicit your prayers, ask for your prayers for my family as we go through this process. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, so just keep us in your prayers. So thank you very much for understanding. And if I look a little puffy-eyed this morning, that's because I needed some tissue. All right. So today is Finance Friday. And as always, I want to make sure that we start off by talking about the history of the black dollar. So we've been learning, as I said before, that people of color, black people, black non-immigrants, descendants of slaves in this country, were the capital, they were the credit, they were the cash. So we, of course, again, I want to reiterate that we in this country, our ancestors, have a very unique relationship with economy that other people coming into this country do not have. All right? They don't have that relationship with economy and money and cash, credit and capital, and our ancestors do. So when people say black people is just black people in this country, you have to understand that there's a history connected to and associated with black Americans who are descendants of the slave trade. All right, their descendants were not called slaves by God, but there was a system of slavery that was instituted that definitely affected how people in this country saw us going from that time even to the present. All right. So we don't want to act like that is not, that didn't happen, or that is not the case. So we're continuing with our talk from the black dollar. And where's the page? We talked about King Cotton, I believe. Yes, we talked about King Cotton. And now I want to talk about the Black Codes. The Black Codes, 1821. Constitution knows no distinction of color, that all who are not slaves are equally free, equally citizens of the United States. That's a quote by William Costin. Becoming the nation's capital in 1791, D.C. was formed from land the federal government provided Maryland and Virginia. D.C. was formed out of two slave states of the Chesapeake. In 1800, blacks comprised 25% of D.C.'s population at 14,093. The majority of them were slaves. As the demand in the nation's capital grew, blacks were forced to construct the U.S. Capitol, the White House, and other historic buildings. Major D.C. ports, Georgetown and Alexandria, until 1846 became major hubs for slave trade. Today, D.C. has one of the largest black populations in the country, and Alexandria is the owner of America's largest housing authority. Some D.C. slaves earned small wages and would save their money to buy their freedom. Others would gain freedom through the death of their masters. Reproducing for decades, the free black population started to expand. Pro-slavery whites, including the mayor, Robert Brent, began to grow concerned, so they introduced the black codes. All right? So when people say, how long have black people in this country been free, and how long have black people in this country been free from terror? I'm gonna make a wild guess at 0 days. Because there has always been something instituted to either oppress or to restrict or to suppress. All right? So when people say black people are free now, I really want to question them and ask them how so? All right? So we're living in a land that consistently does things and has things already set in place that restricts and suppresses black people's success. Yet still we rise, but we don't want to be ignorant of the fact that there has been things that were introduced into our society to suppress and oppress our success. Imagine if none of these things had been introduced into society, how far along black people would actually be. So they began to grow concerned, so they introduced what was called the Black Codes. This was an effort to solidify slavery as an institution and to strengthen the concept of racial segregation in the city. Yes, in Washington, D.C., also formerly known as Chocolate City, because it's not really known as Chocolate City right now. They also restricted the meaning and practice of legal freedom for blacks. Legal freedom. In 1808, the mayor and aldermen set forth the first set of black codes. With these laws in place, it became illegal for Negroes to be loose, idle, or disorderly. So you have to think about who is defining these terms. What does that mean to be loose, idle, or disorderly? And I could tell you up here, because I live in the region, that even if you are out in public in the middle of the day and you're a black person, people look at you as if something is wrong with you. That you are a free person, free to come and go and do what you need to do in society. They still have this mindset. All right? With these laws in place, it became illegal for, quote, Negroes or loose, idle, disorderly persons to be outside after 10 p.m. This was a law. And if you think it's still not on, it may be off the books, but it's still in the minds. Somebody needs to hashtag that. Off the books, in the minds. If caught, blacks would be imposed a fine of $5. There's your black tax, equivalent of about $75 today. Those that did not pay the fine would be whipped. These rules were light compared with the stricter set of black codes that was introduced in 1812. The fines began to increase to $20 for curfew violations. And free blacks that did not pay would be jailed for 6 months. So you're talking about people saying you're free, but the reality is you're legally free. And when you're legally free, then I can begin to impose taxes and fines upon you based on law or based on the laws that I create, that pertains specifically to you and nobody else. All right? So the free blacks who thought they were free could actually be fined for violating a curfew that was put into place for free black people. And if they did not pay it, you're free, but now you have to pay to be free after 10 p.m. And if you did not pay it, you would be jailed for 6 months, entering the convict leasing program, or what we call peonage. So it was a way to bring people back under the bondage of slavery, even though they legally supposedly gave you your freedom. Slaves would be jailed and whipped with 40 lashes for non-payment. Furthermore, freedmen were required to carry their freedom papers always. That would be like what is about to probably come around the corner, because if they are now saying, well, if they're now deporting African immigrants, someone could say you're an African immigrant. You're not a U.S. citizen. So what does that do? That not only makes people of Latino descent have to start carrying papers or their birth certificate to prove that they're a U.S. citizen, but you as a black person may be asked to do that just to make sure that you're not native to Africa. See, laws and regulations have consequences. And unfortunately, the people who are not being affected by these consequences don't think it's a problem. But it's a problem. Not to be outdone, Mayor Smallwood kicked it up a notch in 1821 with a new set of black codes. It required blacks to, quote, appear before the mayor with documents signed by 3 white people vouching for your good character and proving your free status. So when you now see a culture, because this is embedded, this is especially embedded up here in DC, Maryland, Virginia. Now when you see black people who are looking to white people for approval and validation, now you understand why. Because it was embedded in the code that you had to have 3 white people vouch for your good character and prove that you were a free person. So you didn't have to just have your papers showing that you were free. Now you have to go get 3 white witnesses because clearly your word is not good enough. Did you hear me? This is what was on the books. It takes 3 white people plus your word for your word to be valid. Let that sink in. I'm walking through this today. Just let it sink in. They also had to pay a peace bond of $20 to a respected white man as a commitment to good behavior. So now, not only do you regulate my freedom by giving me a curfew, but if I'm caught past curfew, I now have to show you my papers. Wait, I have to go to court. I have to show you my papers. I have to get 3 other white people to vouch for my good character and the fact that I'm free. And then I have to pay another white person as a commitment that I'm going to keep on being a good Negro in society. Now, if you can show me where this spirit is still not in operation in America, then I will stop talking about it. All right? So, there are still people in our society that still look to white society to validate them. And there's still people in our society that support certain endeavors as a commitment to show that they are a good Negro in this society. All right? These aren't my codes. This isn't my law. This is the things that America instituted in its early beginnings that you can still see the remnants of it in our society. So when people say, why don't the athletes or why don't the entertainers, why aren't they like not really more involved in helping the black community? Why, when I see them, they're always giving to something that's outside of their culture? Not saying that they can't help other people, but you have to understand a code has been set in place. They still have to show that they have a commitment to being a good Negro in our society. They didn't set that up. This is what America put and encoded in our society. All right? This code illustrates the precarious nature of freedom for non-enslaved African Americans by attempting to control the movement of people of color. Not only did it control the movement, right? But if you're constantly being stopped for these kinds of things, it also controls your money. Because you may be earning, but you're still paying the tax of being a free black person. And you're still paying to prove that you have a good character and a good commitment of good behavior in society that only lets you be free up until 10 p.m. at night. Famous freedmen such as William Costin refused to pay the peace bond. He argued that the Constitution knows no distinction of color, that all who are not slaves are equally free, equal citizens of the United States. Interestingly, the judge that presided over his case ruled that while the black codes were legal, they could not be enforced on freedmen who were residents before the codes existed. While small in nature, it was a huge achievement for Black America. By taking his victory further, Costin then contended that the concept of race was ill-formed as his ancestors were respectively Cherokee, European, and African. So who was to define him as just African American? All right, same thing with me. My ancestors are African, Cherokee, and European. Starting in the late 1820s, groups began to organize to petition Congress for the abolition of slavery in D.C. There were more free blacks than slaves by 1830 in Washington, D.C. Thousands of petitions from slaves, churches, schools, societies, and businesses would make it through the House of Representatives doors throughout the decade, leading Southern congressmen to establish the gag rule in 1836. So, people are trying to petition about this issue. The free population in D.C. is growing. And what do? They institute another law called the gag rule. This rule banned the introduction of any bills or petitions about slavery. So now, and we keep wondering why our country is built on denial of this area. So now you have them saying, we don't want to listen to you to the point that we will actually make a law that says you can no longer present. You are banned from presenting to ask for recourse concerning this. Yes, the shut up rule. A gag rule. All right, that's 1836. This rule was also the result of the Snow Riot of 1835, with newspapers reporting that D.C. had its own Nat Turner. The paper stated that the 18-year-old slave, Arthur Bowen, attempted to kill Anna Maria Thornton, the wealthy widow of William Thornton, architect of the U.S. Capitol. Miss Thornton owned Arthur and his mother at her home on F Street Northwest. An angry mob of Irish mechanics gathered at Judiciary Square to demand the hanging of Arthur Bowen. They were also upset with local abolitionists who were fighting to end slavery in D.C. Pointing their attention to Dr. Reuben Crandall of Georgetown, the mob had the police search his residence for anti-slavery materials. Upon discovering various publications, he was charged with incitement to rebellion. The mob then demanded the hanging of Bowen and Crandall together. Being prevented by the police to reach either individual, the mob then set their sights on Mr. Beverly Snow's Epicurean Eating House on 6th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. Destroying the restaurant's furniture and inventory, Snow was forced to leave D.C. So because they could not assuage their bloodlust and bloodthirst to lynch two men, they destroyed, they rioted, they looted a black restaurant. The mob looted everything from Snow's restaurant and then continued to destroy other black-owned businesses. For those of you out there who keep saying black people don't start businesses, yes, we do. I'm going to need you to stop saying that. I'm going to need you to understand history. That when we do, things like this happen. You cannot properly build multi-generational wealth with bloodthirsty people destroying your business. So they went and they not only destroyed this restaurant, but they destroyed other black-owned businesses. Among them were some of the first Negro churches. So they destroyed churches as well. And schools in D.C. owned by Reverend John F. Cook on 14th and 8th Streets Northwest. Reverend Cook, too, had to flee D.C. and move to Pennsylvania. This riot was the most symbolic display of anti-slavery in D.C. at the time. So you can't tell me that, well, if you're a Christian, none of these things would happen to you. Because they were burning down churches. They were burning up schools. They were burning up black businesses. I haven't heard about this in the regular history books. Have you? The most famous and interesting slave revolt in D.C. was the Pearl Incident in 1848. 77 of the prettiest slaves, mostly women and children from Georgetown and Alexandria, attempted to escape on a 64-foot cargo. Chartered by two white men, Daniel Drayton and Captain Edward Sayers, the ship was growing a reputation for bringing slaves to freedom for a fee. The captain withstood the heavy risk because he needed the money. Daniel Bell, a free blacksmith working in Navy Yard, was told he needed just $100 to help his family escape D.C. Did you hear that? Escape D.C. While they were legally free, lawyers had tied them up in court. Paying the fee would be a much cheaper option and easier route to freedom. Bell joined together with other blacks, including President Madison's slave, Paul Jennings, and Samuel Edmondson, who wanted to help free his enslaved sisters, Emily and Mary. They were notoriously known throughout D.C. for their beauty, and they were prized slaves. During the celebration of the new French Republic, while D.C. was filled with activity, the ship waited for the slaves at the wharf on the Potomac River in southwest D.C. They planned to reach the Chesapeake Bay and then sail to Pennsylvania. Since the ship could hold more than the Bell and Edmondson families, others asked to join the exciting crusade, reaching 77 passengers. The ship allowed anyone on board that could get on by midnight. Gathering in small groups on a dark Saturday night, the Pearl set sail down the Potomac River, headed to Alexandria, Virginia. The next day, 41 white families woke up to find their slaves gone and quickly formed a group to find them. Reminds me a little bit of the Rapture, you know. Sponsored by the Justice of Peace and others, 35 armed white men went frantically searching D.C., Maryland, and Virginia for the slaves by land. After searching all over for them by land, the slave owner received a tip of their whereabouts from a slave. Wonder why some of us just still can't get free. Because there's some people who are comfortable in their slavery who will happily tell your whereabouts. It's called meritorious manumission, all right? That's a definition word for you to look up. This particular slave had a crush on one of the Edmondson sisters and did not wish for them to leave. So they endangered 76 other people trying to escape slavery. In a very cryptic phrase, he hinted to the slave owners that the group had escaped by water, not horses, as they previously assumed. With this news, the slave owners boarded the steamboat Salem and traveled 100 miles to try to overtake the Pearl at Point Lookout where weather had forced the Freedom ship to dock. The escape provided pro-slavery supporters with ammunition to attack abolitionists for 3 days. Both captains were arrested, and a group of slave owners demanded that they be hung. Most of the captured slaves were sold to the deep south of New Orleans and Georgia. It is rumored in D.C. some of the prettier slaves were not sold or whipped due to their beauty, but rather just forced to walk a long distance as part of their punishment. A small select few gained their freedom through this initiative. While unsuccessful, the Pearl incident was America's largest escape attempt and raised national attention for the abolition of slavery and the slave trade. Shortly after this incident, Congress voted to return the portion of D.C. that had been provided by Virginia in 1846. This forced all blacks living in that portion to immediately lose any protection they had from D.C., especially for education. All black schools closed immediately in that part of town and remained closed for 15 years until the Union Army entered Alexandria during the Civil War. You want to talk about why are we behind? This is just one story. The following year, an established white abolitionist, Gamaliel Bailey, became editor of the anti-slavery newspaper, The National Era. This paper was founded by the American and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society and focused on ending the slave trade in D.C. It is noted as being the original publisher of Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. With tension boiling over, the Compromise of 1850 was introduced to appease both sides by ending or preventing the introduction of slavery and the slave trade in new states, while allowing slavery and the slave trade to continue in states where already legal. This resulted in the introduction of a Slave Trade Act that prevented the importing of enslaved people into the district for resale or transportation elsewhere, but continued to allow the sale of enslaved district residents to slaveholders. The images of slaves walking through D.C. handcuffed after being sold or being sent off for convict leasing did not leave the city. It was a precarious time for D.C. as the free slaves then outnumbered slaves by 2 to 1. To be exact, there were 8,461 freedmen and 4,694 slaves, according to the U.S. Census of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 and the repeal of the gag rule in 1844 grew national attention as momentum for abolitionists, sparking the demand for Congress to exercise its constitutional power to end slavery. Serving as the headquarters for numerous Union forces, black refugees, soldiers, and sailors began flocking to D.C. Refugee camps were created to accommodate new residents, often near the sites of forts that are preserved throughout the district. There were camps at Duff Green Row on 1st Street between East Capitol and A Streets, southeast, at Camp Barker, 12th Street and Vermont Avenue, northwest, and at Freedmen's Village in Arlington, Virginia. On April 23, 1861, after the attack on Fort Sumter, Jacob Dodson wrote a letter to the Secretary of War to say, "I have some 300 reliable colored free citizens of this city who desire to enter the services for the defense of the city." The reply he received stated that this department has no intention at present to call into service of government any colored soldiers. In December 1861, Henry Wilson of Massachusetts entered a bill to end slavery in D.C. Amazingly, the bill passed and was signed into legislation on April 16, 1862. Congress then added an addendum on July 12, 1862, to allow slaves whose owners had not filed for compensation to do so, and allow blacks to testify about their claims. That same week, Congress passed the Second Confiscation and Militia Act, freeing slaves nationwide whose owners served in the Confederate Army. So, business, capital, restriction, codes, fines, good citizenship, all of that is tied to and embedded in our nation's history. All right? I know that took a moment to read, but it's necessary for us to understand the foundation of our economy, taxing of black people, how this is driven. And if you just look around at some of the things that really become a hindrance for black people in this country in terms of moving forward, a lot of it has to do with fines. Legal fines, driving fines, registration fines. My husband and I can tell you about that just recently. Because if you get fined, it's almost like you're being literally fined out of productivity in society. You get fined for something that has to do with driving, right? You get your license suspended. Your license is suspended. I'm just thinking, name me a job off the top of your head that you're going to be able to get with a suspended license. Most jobs require you to have a driver's license or a valid driver's license. So we have to think about how some of these things are still playing into our society today. We're going back to Ben Stein's book on the capitalist code. And I believe that we stopped at the part where he's talking about the pre-dad class. And I want to read to you his section on widows and orphans and the pride of ownership. And then we're going to go into our book on the score, the credit score. We'll continue reading that as well. Widows and orphans. For those of you who want to know, I'm reading from the Capitalist Code. It can save your life and make you very rich. Widows and orphans. I should have seen this at least when I was a college student at Columbia. My first economics teacher, the great C. Lowell Harris, always urged us when thinking about corporations to imagine that all their owners were widows and orphans. That implied some duty of good conduct by corporate officers toward us owners, as small as we were. While there would be evil managers who disdained us stockholders and stole from us, more of them were running a good business that we could be part owners of. This sounds simple, but to this day, the great majority of young people and even older people whom I do meet do not understand it. And back then, when Lyndon B. Johnson was president, I surely didn't get it. To me, corporation stocks were merely bets to be placed on the roulette velvet of life. If I hit a number, it was good, and if I didn't, I was out of there. I didn't get that I owned a piece of business, whether machinery, buildings, land, patents, workers, technology. The interaction of these to make money over time was the key thing that I owned, but I didn't get it. He's talking about when he first began to invest in the stock market. Pride of ownership. And I surely should have gotten it in the mid-1970s when I moved to LA. It was then that my smart literary agent told me to buy a book called Walker's Manual of Western Corporations and see if there were any local Southern California companies whose stock looked attractive. I read the book and actually lit upon one called the Los Angeles Athletic Club Company, or the LAACO. It was a recreational club or clubs and also a holding company for real estate in the greater Southland of California. It was old California money. As far as I could tell by reading its entry, it sat on a combination of cash and real estate that was worth a hefty premium over the price at which the stock was selling. LAACO had been majority owned and run by a prominent local family, the Hathaways, for roughly 80 years when I found it. The shares traded rarely, but again, the price seemed to be a small fraction of what the assets of the company were actually worth. Plus, as most of the shareholders were related to one another, there was reason to believe the company would be managed on the up and up to avoid family disharmony, and because by nature the Hathaways were fine people. So I bought some, but I wish I had bought more. LAACO turned out to be the first company whose shares that I could see up close. I could see that it was genuinely primarily managed in the interest of the owners, and only minimally in the interest of the managers. And I and I was a member of this small family of shareholders, almost as if I were a Hathaway cousin. The small economies, the thrifty way the athletic club was run were for my benefit. This was a revelation to me. I actually was, in a tiny way, the owner of an extremely well-run recreation and real estate holding company in the then booming LA area. It's booming again now. The stock went up and it even paid a sizable dividend. So there, every quarter in the mail was tangible evidence that this company was making money and I was getting some of it. Plus, I had the pleasure of meeting the higher ups in person. They were polite, smart about real estate, and pleasant people. By just a small investment, I had become a pre-dad in real estate. I had become the partner of the brilliant, shining, successful Hathaways of Los Angeles. Again, in a sense, I was a child of the Hathaways, and they certainly treated me that way. SoCal is subject to wild swings in real estate valuations. This moved the stock in LAACO and scared me to the point that I thought I better start diversifying somewhat away from Southern California property. I sold a small amount of LAACO. Mistake. Still, I kept a lot of what I owned. The dividends were paid like clockwork, and I was genuinely pre-dad on the petri dish of investing and money. So there really were corporations whose management made us stockholders partners. Some years later, LAACO did in fact shift to a partnership form of ownership, and its partnership interests are now publicly traded. They trade rarely, but look them up and decide for yourself. The ticker for them on the stock exchange is LAACZ. The same agent who led me to LAACO also told me about his favorite stock, something I had never heard of called Berkshire Hathaway. He said it was a stock one must never sell. I bought some and then I handled it in almost exactly the wrong way. By the way, it's pure coincidence that two of the absolute best investments of my life involve the name Hathaway. There is no connection at all between the two companies except that I write about them occasionally. So, what is he talking about? He's talking about how he came to invest in the stock that he owns now, that he's been obviously owning for several decades. And consider what he's saying. He's saying that there's a actual book, Walker's Manual of Western Corporations, that you can order to help you figure out what stocks are selling low or below their value, so that you can actually begin to pick your own stocks to invest in that are going to grow over time. Remember, when you talk about stocks and investing, you can't be a person who is hasty to make money. There are other investments that involve more risk that can make you fast money. But if you're talking about this kind of investment, especially in real estate, it's going to take time to see dividends. And you got to be willing to hold on to your stock. All right. We're back in our credit score book for today. Your score. All right. For those of you who are screenshotting, I'm just holding up here for a moment. Last time we talked about the 7 things. The 7 things that hurt your score. And then we talked about how else your score is being used. Today, we're going to talk about how do you find out what your credit score is. And we're going to begin the section on what is actually inside of your score. What's in your score? How do you find out what your credit score is? This is important. If you based your knowledge of the credit landscape just on the advertisements you saw on television and received through email solicitation, you'd probably think that the reports you can get from freecreditreport.com would be more than sufficient to verify a lot of the information we're going to talk about in this book. You would be wrong. Those free reports are what are called consumer education reports, which are not compiled using the same algorithms and data as your real credit report. So let me just take a sip right there, because how many people have ordered from a report from freecreditreport.com? You put some hearts on the screen. And what he's saying is that's actually not your real credit report. Surprise! But the free reports, listen, the free reports are consumer education reports. They're not compiled using the same algorithms and data as your real credit report. And so people get these consumer credit reports and they think that's their score, and they start trying to fix things based on their consumer credit report. And this is why some of us keep going in circles and we don't understand what the problem is. He said, I'm not saying these reports are worthless. They can be a decent starting point for your investigation. But the free reports you get online generally only cover 2 years of transactions. And in addition, they don't necessarily show your activity with all of your creditors. The score on one of those reports can vary dramatically from what your real scores show. I've had clients show me results of a free credit report that had them listed at 760, which is a very good score, only then to get real scores and find them actually in the high 600s. That can make for the difference between qualifying for the best mortgage program at your bank and getting declined for a loan. The very best credit report is called a tri-merge. All right, a tri-merge. So if you're taking notes, write that down. And it can only be ordered, listen, it can only be ordered by a mortgage or banking professional. So some of y'all can march into your banks on Monday morning or Friday afternoon and say, I need a tri-merge credit report ordered. It pulls together the reports from all 3 bureaus and combines duplicate information. This is what we need. Anybody else have gotten frustrated by ordering several reports and you see duplicate information, or you see information on one and not information on another? It's called a tri-merge credit report, and it can only be ordered by a mortgage or banking professional. I found that the best way to get one of these reports is to make friends with your realtor or mortgage originator at the local branch of your bank. Many of us have realtor friends. It would have been nice if they would have told us this, right? But I'm not going to go there today. I'll leave y'all alone, all my realtor friends. Your realtor will have good relationships with originators and bankers who want him or her to send business, so they'll be willing to run a report for you. But if you can't get access to that kind of report, the next best kind of report comes from myfico.com. All right, myfico.com, F-I-C-O, myfico.com. FICO is the company that creates the algorithms that actually crunch all the data that credit bureaus collect. For about $60, you can get FICO's version of a tri-merge, which will give you estimated scores from all 3 credit bureaus, along with a score simulator that will show you what could happen if your credit score, if you make certain changes to the mixture and balances on your current accounts. So when you're talking about those who go to a credit counselor, all right, you can pay $60, go to myfico.com, pay $60, and look at what your scores are. And this report will actually show you what to do to improve your score. The only difference between the MyFICO report and the real professional version of your credit report is that the professional version covers a longer time frame. I found the scores from my FICO report to be closest to the real ones out of any of the non-professional choices. So, to sum it up, you can go into the credit process without any of the information we're going to talk about in this book, but you'll be at the mercy of somebody else's profit motive. One of my clients came to me because she was in the process of applying for a mortgage loan through a bank that she had used for more than 10 years. Her mortgage originator said he was very familiar with her credit profile, and he thought he could get her a great rate on a loan. Based upon those assurances, she didn't take any extra steps beyond filling out the mortgage application, and she was disappointed when she was pre-qualified for a loan that was for less than what she was hoping. She then went outside her bank to shop around and see if she could secure a larger pre-qualification letter. The very first stop she made at a different bank was an eye-opener. It turned out that her credit score was terrific, and she could easily qualify for a much better product than the one her original banker was trying to sell her. Keep in mind, she had been at that bank for 10 years, so they had an idea of her credit history, her banking history, right? Her reliability of keeping her account. My guess is that the original loan offer was probably one that first the bank was offering incentives to the originators in order to push it through to the clients. So maybe that particular bank got some extra incentives for giving her that particular deal. The difference between the two loans was more than $450 per month in payments. My client took the second loan offer and was able to pay for her property taxes too, just with the extra amount she saved by shopping around a bit and getting a look at her real credit scores. Let the buyer beware. So let's talk about what's in your score. Now that you know what the game is and what the stakes are, it is time to decipher the scoreboard. You've read about how the 3 credit bureaus compile information about your history and sell the data to creditors so they can make decisions about lending you money. And now you know why so many of the free credit reports you can get are worth about what you paid for them, which is 0. In this chapter, I'm going to take you on a comprehensive tour of your real score. I'll show you how the bureaus are truly measuring you, what things you do that help and hurt your scores, and how to make sure there's no information on your credit reports that does not belong there. It all starts with, excuse me, it all starts with FICO, originally known as Fair Isaac and Company. FICO started in 1956 as a service to help lenders make faster, more accurate loan decisions. The methods FICO uses today are way more sophisticated than those in the 1950s, but the overall concept is still the same. The company figures out what factors make people more or less likely to default on a loan, and it builds formulas called algorithms to make those predictions. FICO sells those algorithms to the credit bureaus, which then use the data they collect on your payment history, balances, and other borrower information to come up with your credit score. Here's where it gets confusing. Each credit bureau collects data in subtly different ways. For example, they might collect data at different times or collect it more or less frequently. So when each bureau plugs in its own set of data into the algorithm, it comes up with a different score. That means you might have a 700 credit score with Equifax, but a 720 with Experian and TransUnion. This is important to know because various lenders use different credit bureaus to check your score. So if you have a great score with one, but a lesser one with the other two, the higher score isn't going to help you if it's with a credit bureau that your lender does not use. And since lenders have to pay to have their data recorded by bureaus, some smaller companies might report to only 1 or 2 of them, while the big credit card companies and department stores will report to all 3. The system is designed both to give creditors a way to quickly judge risk and incentivize borrowers not to flake out on their debts because the debt police are watching. Another complication comes from the algorithm that FICO produces. FICO actually sells a variety of algorithms to lenders, each of them designed to weigh risk for a particular kind of borrower. There's a universal FICO algorithm, but there's also one, as I said before, that we learned about. There's also one specifically designed for car loans. There's one designed for house mortgages, and there's one designed for credit cards. FICO's algorithms are secret, but we do know the relative importance of some factors or the basic ingredients of the credit pie. All right, so as we have a little bit of time, I'm going to try to draw the credit pie for us, and then next week we will come back and talk about the pieces, begin to talk about the pieces of the credit pie. All right, so let me try to draw it for you as this will be our closing today. So the credit pie. I'm going to try to do it as best I can to the visual I see here. All right. I think that should give you an idea. Ooh, that's a bad pie. Excuse me, guys. Because I'm going to have to probably color some of this in. All right. So, make sure I got green and a red. Okay. So 35%. 35% of your pie is based on your payment history. All right. 30% of your pie, everybody can see that, hopefully. 30% of your pie is based on amounts owed. What do you have outstanding that is owed? %30 amounts owed. All right. 15% is based on the length of your credit history. Let's see. 10% is based on your types of credit. And then 10% is based on your variety of credit. All right. So that's your breakdown. This is what's in your score. And as you can see, 65% of it has to do with your payment history and amounts owed. That's huge. All right. So the first two that we're going to talk about next week will be your payment history and the amounts owed and how important it is to your score. All right. So this has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I want to thank you for your time and your attention today. I hope that you will join us again once we return for our next set of broadcasts. Those of you who came on late, I want to let you all know that I may have to postpone my broadcast for next week due to some family concerns and business that I have to take care of that involve a loved one who is not doing well. So I look forward to returning as soon as I can. But I definitely know that I probably will not be on Monday. All right. So please keep my family in your prayers. I do covet your prayers. I do ask that you pray for us. And I will let you all know once the broadcast will return. You can check our Daring Dialogues Facebook page for updates on when the broadcast will return. All right. But until we meet again, screenshot this. And remember, if you want to get that process started on your real credit score, make sure you go to myfico.com or see if you can get your mortgage person or your bank to order you the Tri-Merge credit document. Okay? All right? So again, I want to thank you for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. Thank you all so much. Thank you to those who are a part of the We Dare Squad who are continuing to support what we do here. We cannot do what we do without listener support. So thank you for being a part of that. I do appreciate it. All right. Everyone have a great and wonderful day. Take care and God bless. All right. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in today. Please make sure that you check out our Facebook page, Daring Dialogues, to keep up with our updates for when we will return to our regular broadcasts. Thank you so much again. Take care and God bless. Thank you for your prayers.